Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 6th season. Today we're recording the newly Oscar-winning film that won in almost every category. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. This is a story of how a family makes meaning out of their everyday lives and heals from trauma in the most spectacular film I've ever seen. We will discuss intergenerational trauma, existentialism, and nihilism in this episode. So how do y'all want to get started?
Okay. Well, this is one of your favorite movies, Hannah.
Agreed.
Which is why it got on the top of this list.
Yes, it did.
Mm-hmm. And I know we're going to start with intergenerational trauma, which I think we see as a theme almost immediately, or at least the impact of the generations of the family of this movie.
Yes.
Because as we see, the grandfather, Gong Gong, is staying with Evelyn. And you can feel this kind of, you can feel the stress vibrating off of her, period.
Yes.
But you can really feel the stress of her prioritizing his approval almost immediately.
Which we then find out later on in the film is somewhat against her will.
Oh, yeah?
That she's getting calls from China that he's not doing well, and now he's here.
Oh, I've seen this movie 3 times, and I've missed that every single time. I feel like so much is going on in this movie.
It's almost like there's a reason it's called.
I'm holding onto it with my fingertips, the plot. And not in a bad way. I think it's just so stimulating, this movie, that I'm not shocked that there's plot points that I've missed.
Yeah.
Even though I've watched it more than once.
Yeah. Yep. Well, looking at the impact of intergenerational trauma, you see how he refused to give his approval to Evelyn, and now Evelyn won't give her approval to Joy.
And Evelyn's using her father's older, more traditional viewpoints as what's the word I'm looking for? As the reason why she's withholding some of her approval from Joy. Like, there's a few moments in the movie where she's like, well, I can't because Gong Gong won't like that. And eventually Joy says, stop trying to basically weaponize his belief system as a way for you to not be approving of me, which I think was pretty on par. I liked that note from Joy.
Yep. It just resonates over and over again that we can't escape our biology. And it takes conscious effort to undo the biological need to appease our parents. No matter how awful they have been to us, we have it hardwired in our systems that we need to seek their approval because it will be easier or because that's what you're supposed to do and that's what we were taught to do. And you see it in films like this one that have made it their theme to hit at how hard this comes across in some cultures versus others. Chinese culture being one of them, with so much emphasis on showing respect to your family, respect to your elders, respect to your ancestors. And there's so much reverence for that. And then add the extra complicated layer of being born a daughter when they can only have one child.
The scene in the movie when they're like, I'm sorry, it's a girl.
I'm sorry, it's a girl. But still looking at, despite that she's been behind the 8 ball her entire life simply for being born a female. She knows she can never fully get his approval, but can't stop herself from activating all of the cultural and societal based learning that we must honor them. And we must honor our parents, and we must honor our family. And even when it comes between her and her daughter, she's trying desperately to not be repeating this, but can't stop herself in the moment.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful because it happens that quick. The scene where they're standing outside of the car after they had the fight, where Evelyn refused to acknowledge her daughter's relationship and said, "Good friend," when
Yeah, in the very beginning.
In the very
first
beginning.
Scene, yeah, one of the first scenes.
she went out there, her body language said she was going out there to say, "I'm sorry."
Ugh, I know.
And then she was awful.
You need
She
to be
was
healthier.
She was so mean. She was so mean, and you could tell that Joy was just crushed.
Destroyed.
Yeah.
Because you could tell in that exchange, like you're saying, Ben, that they were so close to it. And I think they both could feel it. Like Evelyn could feel that she almost wanted to, she wanted to say something different. And Joy held in that moment as if she was finally going to hear something different. And they both were like deflated when it went the way that I'm sure it's gone hundreds of times before.
Yeah.
Yep. But looking at when they start fast forwarding back, or rewinding for those of us who remember what those terms mean, or may have had a little car thing that you put the tape in so you don't burn out the
I was
VCR.
one of those so fucking bad.
But how many times she reached out for her father's approval and couldn't get it, that it must feel so foreign to her that she can't do it either. And you watch how over and over again it's biologically hardwired to keep giving approval to these people who are going to hurt you in a way that you can't win from, because
Yeah.
those people are the most likely to make sure you're alive when you're a small person, no matter what. And we can't break that or fight that easily. As we become big people with our own problems and our own family, we still can't break away easily to take care of our own family and not repeat that and still cater to. It would be easier to appease grandpa if you just had a good friend for today. Can you just have a good friend for today? Not a girlfriend, a good friend.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think what's so hard, I mean, a lot of my thoughts are lighting up with all that you just said, Ben, is that I think something I noticed right off the bat with Evelyn, and this is, I think, true in all the examples you're giving, is prioritizing the immediate need and not being cognizant or aware or letting yourself be aware of the what you're sacrificing while you're still driving towards that singular need. And so with Evelyn, what we see almost immediately is her trying to be the person her dad will approve of, is sinking her marriage, is sinking her relationship with her daughter's self-concept, and is sinking, even like I would argue the business they're in, because she's never fully throwing herself into what's actually going on in her life. She's like, she's somewhere else. And like you can even see with her husband, Wayman, like how much he's trying to be there for her and how much he's trying to grab her attention and help her, really. If you really, like, now that I watched it a few times, the third time I noticed how much he's genuinely trying to help her, and she won't allow it because she's so locked into this almost like forward movement. Like she's like trying to make this lane work, because at the end of that lane is her father's approval, and she can't quite like take herself off of that track, and is just not aware of how destructive that track is in its own way. And you're right in that. I think this is a big theme going on across cultures right now, which is this generational divide that I think is leading to a lot of art that we're witnessing, because this is like the third movie of this kind that we've talked about. Like,
At least.
like in Kanto's one, we haven't talked about Turning Red, but that's also very similar, which is now this whole genre of movies being made by people our age where their parents apologize.
Because
for
boomers
this
don't
shit.
apologize.
Yeah. And so I think what we're noticing within her, which I think is very ingrained, like I said, across cultures, of you are forever indebted to your parents, no matter what they do or what their relationship's like. You always have to be grateful and appeasing and striving for their approval, no matter how they treat you. And then if you're not abiding by that script, sort of, it's really uncomfortable for, I think, the older generation. And now the younger generation, so like Joy's age and around that age, are finally approaching it differently. And it's causing a lot of strife and disturbance, because there's a version of the story, if this took place 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where Joy would take it on the chin in her own way. And so I think we're seeing this change now happen, and it's causing a lot of distress in the older generation of, why can't my kids just, like all these people more Evelyn's age who are shocked that their kids are going no contact or not having a relationship with them, because they're breaking that long-held generational script of, you always prioritize your parents no matter what.
Blood is thicker than water.
Which is, as you know, with Shakespeare, like that's actually only half the quote. And what it really says is that family's garbage. The relationships you choose are actually the ones that are strong. And so, which is funny that people use it in that way and they don't actually understand what they're quoting.
Wait, what? People misquote things without understanding the full meaning?
You heard it here first on Popcorn Psychology. It took us 6 seasons to get here.
No.
And I would even argue, and I'm interested in what both of you would say, is I would also argue that Evelyn would not consider her situation trauma. I think if you told Evelyn you have you're suffering with intergenerational trauma, she would say, trauma? What are you talking about? I got everything I needed. You know what I mean? And so I think even that concept, like identifying that the relationship is traumatic, is a totally different idea that feels, I don't know, like doesn't mesh with this thought process.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, because I think one of the things that we're all kind of pointing out about Evelyn is she just doesn't have the awareness, nor does it seem like she wants to. Or maybe she doesn't have the capacity to have the awareness.
I feel like she's so overstimulated and overwhelmed, like how we meet her.
Yeah.
That it also makes me wonder how much she's been able to slow down to even be cognizant of, it's almost like she's like letting life happen to her. In a lot of ways, keeping her head above water. And when that's going on, like you don't really have time to slow down and be like, what's not working?
Correct. I mean, that's the whole point of the film. Is
Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Right. It's almost like the title was perfect. And the film was perfect. But also looking at that exact concept, if you're constantly in a state of threat, you can never regulate your body enough to calm down, process, readjust, strategize, digest, and move your life out of a state of constant survival and into a state of thriving. Survive and thrive do not exist in the same space.
No. They do not. They can't.
They can't. It's not possible to be strategic when you're trying to survive. People who see me will know that I break it down to real simple terms over and over on purpose of, is there a tiger trying to eat you right now?
Yes.
To help people understand what's going on in their body. Your body doesn't come equipped with enough circuitry to differentiate types of threat. Like, it does differentiate between mortal threat and non-mortal threat. So it does have that much circuitry capacity. However, it doesn't separate out beyond that. So unable to please dad, unable to ever get dad's approval is a constant threat that keeps her constantly dysregulated, unable to attend to the present, unable to be focused on anybody else's needs because she's in that constant go, 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 go. But the bitch of intergenerational types of traumas is you're chasing a target that is both moving and standing still at the same time. You can never, ever, ever catch it. No matter how fast you go, no matter how well you do.
It's like a dream where the target keeps getting just ahead of you, no matter how fast you run.
And like we saw in Encanto, it's what Mirabelle eventually realizes is that none of us can ever be good enough for you. And I don't think Evelyn could ever be good enough for her father.
And that's where she kind of comes to at the end for herself when she's finally like, this is Becky. Becky is Joy's girlfriend, yada, yada. You know, is that she has that realization because she goes through, you know, obviously the mind meld that is this movie. No, but I think something you highlighted too that I wanted to touch upon as well is this idea that you'll always, like you said, the target's always moving because we always, no matter how hard we try to fight it, there's always going to be a part of us that wants our parents' approval. And so when I do this work with clients, a lot of our work together is something I'll talk about later, which is like you just have to acknowledge that, radically accept that. There's going to be a part of you that's always going to want that. And because you're wanting that doesn't mean you have to behave in a way that's chasing that. And I think that's the part that's hard for people to piece apart, understandably so, is if the desire is hanging out with me, how do I not act upon it and feel driven by it? And so the work I do with people is you can both have that desire, acknowledge that, and simultaneously, like Wise Mind, acknowledge that that's not healthy for me, or that's a well that's dry. Like I both want this from my mother, I want this from my father, and they can't give it to me.
Right.
And truly acknowledging that, you know,
and really,
not just making a joke or brushing it off.
Yeah, and really holding on to it and really being able to hold on to it when they have to. In moments, and being able to, and it's also an increase in awareness. It's an increase in being aware of being in that situation again and being in this place and having realizations that my behavior keeps bringing me to the same feeling, the same place.
And no matter what I do, it never works.
Yeah.
Which means that you keep striving for it, because tying like all these ideas together, so long as one of your parts has identified something as a need, its mission is to fulfill that need, and it's not going to let it go until that need is either met or resolved. This entire movie is literally set up on the concept of parts work. Every choice you make in life sets up another multiverse, another version of you that made the opposite choice. That lends to the exact point I'm making, that somewhere inside of you, a version that did everything differently at every decision point you ever made exists. However, in most cases, we resolved that once you made a choice to go to a school or start a job path. You stopped thinking about the other one once you resolved it. You don't go back and play, I should have gone back to that school, unless you do. I shouldn't have made this choice. I should have made that one. And the part of you that still replays that choice moment over and over again is now suspended in a reality where it's torturing itself by playing the movie forward of every other choice being different in their life, which is what we see in this film, right? Like all the different versions of Evelyn. Had she not gone with Wayman and left China to go to America, she could have been
Michelle Yeoh.
Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah.
She could have been a kung fu master movie star because she would have gotten attacked and then, had someone step in and feel motivated enough to take that path, but she didn't. But people do that over and over again because once a part inside of you identifies a need, until it's resolved, it doesn't let it go. It just keeps bringing it up to you. You should have done this. You shouldn't have done that. And we can torture ourselves with that. But where it gets to be a bigger problem, when we're looking at how a parent's trauma impacts a child, and that then impacts their child, is now we're looking at Gong Gong's need to have a son to pass on his legacy never got met, which would have been important to him. And so he remained bitter and angry because that part of him that wanted that, he never resolved it. He never accepted, I had a daughter and she can be amazing.
Yeah.
Instead, he reminded her constantly, because the part of him that resented that remained active and was not solved. Then she's chasing her tail, and she can never please him, but she keeps trying because she has to. But then her need never gets met to be good enough, so she never believes she's good enough, so she teaches her daughter that you must keep working always because you'll never be good enough. And she never issues acceptance until the end, When she sees through all the clouds of all this bullshit and realizes, if I let all of that go and live from this point forward, all of those parts shut up and I can just move forward with my life. Which is oversimplifying it, but that's where the movie left us.
Well, Ben, you've mentioned parts a few times.
Yes.
I think for people who maybe haven't listened to another episode where we talk about that, it might be helpful to define what you mean by a part or parts.
Ooh, I think we should take a break before I do that.
Okay.
All right, so what are parts? Our consciousness is not linear. We have one body, but our mind is capable of splitting into different sub-functions of our personality that are capable of responding to whatever survival situation presents itself, allowing us to separate out from what our whole might want in order to do whatever is necessary to survive the moment, whatever we've interpreted that is. That doesn't have to be exactly what's happening, but however it's perceived is how it will be responded to. So to put that in example terms, every one of us can probably think about what would happen if somebody who wasn't supposed to be in our house came into our house in the middle of the night. And whatever suspension, whatever kind of person you are, whatever you believe, kindness or giving to others who are in need or questioning things before acting, somebody shows up in your house that's not supposed to be there in the middle of the night, you already know they're probably not leaving without holes in them. And that's your fight part. There's not going to be questions asked. You're not going to be asking, why are you here? You're going to be yelling. You might be running. You might be hiding. You might be locking yourself away. You might be attacking them. But there will not be questions asked. Especially not if you do ask questions and they're not responded to. If you're in a dark alley and someone starts chasing you, you're going to stick around to ask them, why are you following me? Or are you going to run? Whatever parts of you exist that could run or might be curious, or maybe this person needs help, all those things get shut off when you interpret danger and they say run, and your flight part activates. So we can turn off different functions of our personality to match the needs of survival. Fight might turn on. You might be a compassionate person who cares, but I will tell you right now, if someone comes into my house where my child and wife are sleeping and they're not supposed to be here, there will be no questions. It's going to be attack immediately. I may not try to kill them immediately, but I will seek to incapacitate instantly. And that mama bear or papa bear mode, let's look at, what would you do? Someone hurts your child. Are they going to live another day? No matter what kind of person you are, you're going to find that primal mode. And the same thing can be true for people like to talk all the time of, I'd do this or I'd do that if something happened. If you perceive in the moment that you are actually at a substantial disadvantage, like let's say in that metaphor, the person who busted into your house is 7'1" of brick shit house and has a chainsaw, you're probably not going to charge them.
Well, yeah. Not that example.
You see how it changes, though?
Yeah.
Like I had
How's the weather up there? And then I'd run.
Right. I had your fight part all queued up, and then you see 7'1" brick shit house chainsaw, and you go like, nope.
Yep. Yep.
And it shuts down fight. It shuts down the need to protect your home, and you're going to run. We have various parts of ourselves that evolve to meet whatever needs are presented. So the standard ones that they often talk about as a simple example are, we have a fight part, but your fight and your submit parts can't exist at the same time. You cannot fight someone to the death and give up at the same time. So one of those has to turn on or off. And the parts of you that exist in your whole contain all of them. When the danger is presented itself, you have to do one or the other and tell the others to shut off, because you only have enough function to turn one on in the moment. And fight, flight, freeze, fawn, cry for help, these kinds of things, you can't run all those at the same time in the moment. When you're calm, when you're thinking, you can selectively choose from any or all of those, unless there's a mortal threat that requires you to operate in a mode that doesn't have time to think. It doesn't have the luxury of safety to choose. your response. If shooting starts in a neighborhood you're in, you'd better start running. And your body's going to take care of that for you. It's going to dissociate away from whatever you're doing and say, time to go. Understanding that people have as many parts as they need to survive their life is really important, understanding how this whole system works, because the more you perceive danger, the more you're going to operate out of a system that you have created to specifically survive that threat. We all have a child part that responds to our parents in the ways we were taught to respond to our parents, in the adaptive ways we were taught to respond to our parents, that will spontaneously show up at Christmas.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's a great example, because I think what's important to note, based on what you've just shared, is that those parts don't only exist in those extreme examples you're giving. That when you're talking about parts in the context of this movie, you're talking about, which when you do parts work as the client or even as a therapist, is more identifying like all the different people that almost that live inside of you that get dinged during certain situations that developed over time. And so you're right, like there is the child part of you. I think people always remark about how everyone regresses a little bit when they go home for the holidays or when they're with their siblings. Like that's an example where the part of you that's still that age kind of comes to the surface because it knows how to operate within that environment.
Correct.
Which is why we can get a little immature, if you will, when we're around our siblings. Kind of play with each other as if we're still young, or fight with each other as if we're still young, in a way that if we had a significant other coming with us, they'd be like, "What the fuck was that?" like
Right.
maybe see a version of you that feels really out of character.
That only emerges under specific conditions.
Yeah.
Right. And right, we have as many of these as we've needed, and they're not all extreme.
Yeah.
But they all are adaptive to certain things. Like there's a work version of you. That's different than the you are with your friends. There's a version of you that deals with your grandma, and there's a version of you that deals with your parents. And you may be on the phone with your parents, and that might be a sub-function of your submit part, like, okay, mom, whatever you need, yes, yeah, and like hating everything. And it's might be some combination of you're like checking out and giving them access to only a safe mode, basically. Like mom has hurt me so many times, she only gets safe mode version of me. She doesn't get access to the full version of me anymore because she has not demonstrated herself to be. We live in a city, guys, so
You might have heard a car alarm just then.
honking of horns. But
It happens.
It happens. But looking at like that safe mode version of you, you might be operating in a dissociated state that people can only talk to so much of you, but you won't ever let them into what's really going on. And that's what we see with Evelyn and Wayman, and what he's trying to tell her is, you only pay attention to me when there's an emergency. Because the only time she's outside of her head in this dissociated world, running in like safe mode to stay on top of all this shit that she's trying to manage internally, no one else can access her during that time. And so Wayman gets safe mode version of her all the time.
Or he gets, honestly, I think sometimes he gets fight mode version of her too. Because also, one of the few times that she really gives him attention is to bicker at him, to demean him in a lot of ways. And even when, in the scene in the beginning, when you see him in the background that he's changed and now he's like Alpha Wayman and he's doing all those flips and shits on the security camera, she says this more than once in the movie to different people, you know, your father's always screwing everything up. Like she's very lit up in a specific way in regards to him, not just towards him, but to everybody. He triggers a very specific part in her.
I think that she looks at him the way that she thinks that Gong Gong looks at him.
Oh, that's probably true.
Probably.
And then I would also say too, with Joy,
Once she's gotten to this place where she's so disconnected.
yeah, and I would say she probably also with Joy, like it's also second generation girl, only girl, and now she's a lesbian and she's Americanized. You know what I mean?
And Grandpa's here.
And Grandpa's here, and so I think all those factors are. You're right, Hannah, which I think is that she is viewing probably Wayman and Joy through that. How will my father perceive them, and judging them accordingly? Unfortunately.
Well, and tie that together with what you said earlier of like you think Wayman like gets fight version of her. You're right. He's getting some fight version of her, but what he said is critical to why is because the only time he actually gets any attention from her is when there's a problem.
Yeah.
Which means that fight mode needs to override her internal bullshit and turn it off so she can respond to that, crush it.
Yeah.
So it stops being a problem so she can go back to managing her impossible one.
Because what does their relationship matter if they can't eat or they can't thrive? Their business can't thrive. You know what I mean? And I don't think they're, like when people are in this mode that she's in, like we said before, I don't think they're very cognizant that they're doing that.
No.
That they in those moments, like if they were in an office doing couples therapy and Wayman brought this up, I think Evelyn would very honestly, like this is what would be her honest thought would be, how can you ask me to do a date night or to slow down when if I do this, we will die, we will perish, like we will fall apart. Because she can't chill out enough. She can't deactivate, as you would probably say, Ben, enough to feel like she's not in that constant state of threat. What does it matter if their marriage is working, quote unquote? What does that even mean? And if it's not working, there's a way that she could argue that it's his fault.
Which she will, because one of the things that is really challenging is when you get your teenage fight part on, which is incapable of acknowledging its own role in things because it's egocentric.
Yeah.
And when you have...
I know that part of myself.
Yes. I know that part of myself too.
Part of yourself and ourselves.
Yeah, I'd say I think you both know that part of myself. Anyway, sorry, Ben.
No, it's okay. But parts is a deep, long, detailed conversation that can take 40 hours of training to barely scratch the surface of and understand. But looking at it in simple terms is understanding we have internal multiverses that we operate. And there is no internal TVA to shock your ass back to the sacred timeline and get you where you're supposed to go. That shocks the variant out and gets you back. What happens is we have this really adaptive system that tries to protect our ego, our core self, the core vulnerable person inside of us that we all are. When we are calm and online, that part of us takes the skills from all the different versions of ourselves and is able to apply it strategically in context. Is this starting to sound like this movie a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when it is calm and strategic and able to do that, we can operate, and especially when we're either calm or even more so in flow states, right? Flow state is when you're in the zone, when you're able to spontaneously access everything you've ever known and apply it immediately. Like musicians get like, wow, I don't even know how I played that solo, but I just tore it up. Or athletes spontaneously remember, if I do this exact move at this time and do that, combine it with this move and do this thing that nobody's ever done before, I can... There was Troy Polamalu from the Steelers is great. I know I'm not speaking your guys' language, but this guy he realized if all of these guys on this line are about to chop block and dive down at the knees of everybody else, and I can jump on a stack of boxes that are 42 inches high, if I wait until they dive, and as soon as the ball snapped, I jump over all of them, I can block the kick.
I've never heard so many words said together that I have no context for. But I trust you in what you're saying. And I'm sure other people listening get it.
I mean, anybody who, is a football fan of the, 2000s, yes, would have watched this man, like, this Hawaiian dude with his long flowing hair.
Hot.
Just jump over all of these dudes and like block kicks or like tackle quarterbacks before anything happens. You just jump over everybody. And nobody ever thought of that before, but that spontaneous generation of like, I can combine all these skills right now into something that's going to work. That's what flow is. And when we're in that, we can draw from all the skills of our parts, which is where Evelyn and what Jobu does is operates, sees through the truth of all of it. It's all the same shit. So it doesn't matter which thing you pull, but the ability to do that happens to us when we're in flow state. So we pull from all of our parts, all of our everything, every experience ever. We can pull from it. But when it's a survival situation, we don't have time for that.
Because I think, and I wonder what you both think about this, because it's just a thought that's coming to me in the moment, isn't really based on, literature, if you'd say. But you have to have a sense of self, like a confidence in order to get into things like flow state. You have to have a sense of like yourself, who you are, what you're good at, all those kind of things, I imagine. And
At least in that moment.
yeah. And I think what we see when you're in fight or flight mode, survival mode all the time, trauma mode, and or like this version that Evelyn's struggling with, like intergenerational trauma, is where are you developing that sense of self that feels confident to do things, to kind of let go and integrate all the skills that you have. Because I think what's so hard about Evelyn, like the worst, quote unquote, worst Evelyn, as they sort of call her in the movie, is that because she's been striving so much for her father's approval and then kind of chasing that on top of never really fully immersing herself in any of the things that she likes or feels driven by, which they talk about like first at the audit, like a lot of hobbies, nothing into fruition. And then you have a daughter that's pushing you and defying you, and you're kind of passing down that self-hatred mode. Mm-hmm. Then where is the part of you that trusts yourself to know that I could handle this, or I could not just like I could make it till tomorrow, which I think is what she believes. I could make it till next week. But truly that like I know I have things inside of me that are good, that if I really let myself feel it and trust myself, that we can get to a place where it's working and I feel good. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's so hard and why people have to go no contact with their parents sometimes, or have a lot of distance, where we're seeing the things that are breaking generational curses, as everyone's saying nowadays, is that recognition. I think that in order to stay in this relationship, and in order for me to fully actualize, to figure out who I am, to have a sense of identity, I have to, at least for now, maybe not forever, but for now, have to separate myself from you in order to have the space to do that. And I think that it's sort of taken a different context, but I know Joy at the end of this movie, she kind of has her version of that, where she tells her mom, like, we're hurting each other. Maybe we need to let each other go. I know she's in a more nihilistic state, but I think it's that idea of that, like, right now, it's not working. We're together. We need space to grow if we can. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be seen in, like, a form of punishment, which I think is unfortunately how it gets received and how it's talked about right now culturally, when kids have to make that, adult children have to make that distance. But I think that's what is really missing for this version of Evelyn that we see. This, is that she doesn't have confidence to really feel like I think she thinks she's not good at anything.
I would argue that she has no sense of self.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you're right on with it. And if you look at it with these intergenerational things, right? Like this movie does a good job of showing like boomer to X to
millennial,
and looking at exactly how things started to change, because the Xers were far more dependent on the boomers than later millennials were on the Xers, because the amount of information available and contact between people opened up in infinite ways that did not exist before. They never had access to that many people to know my story actually isn't that unique or shameful, and I don't have to keep it. Some people still are stuck with that, but these Zoomers and the younger millennials, unfortunately for us elder millennials, we can still identify with the Breakfast Club and watch that and go like, oh, no, daggers right in the neck, even though that was, released right about when we became alive.
It's pre my birth.
Yes.
But I know what you mean.
Like looking at that, but what's happening now is that because these older generations represent that state of threat constantly that can't be resolved, people who are starting to get adaptive, like we're seeing Joy do, of like, you know what, we can go no contact with you because we actually aren't as dependent on you as you were on your parents. And this narrative that you adhere to, where family keeps you safe, well, you don't keep me safe. You actually are the only thing that prevents me from being the version of myself that can access flow. So I'm going to extricate you from my life. And then I'm going to be in this more comfortable state where I can be the me I intend to be without fear that you're going to knock me off my flow. because you're always a threat, which means I always then leave this calm, integrated state and can no longer function the way I want to. So if you're the one that makes me feel that way, fuck you. Act right or get out of my life.
Yeah. And Evelyn can't tell her dad, fuck you.
Nope.
That's not in her wiring.
No.
And she doesn't want that to be in her wiring too, which I think is part of witnessing that version of like intergenerational trauma feels so sad too, is that and Joyce has this as well, which is going back to that you'll always want your parents' approval, I'm trying not to be too corny what I'm about to say, but like, it's so moving in the movie when Joy says, I still want you to understand me. Like I went through all this. I saw everything. I saw literally everything. And at the end of that road, I still wanted my mom to see it too and to understand me. And what a beautiful thing it is that children want so much from their parents. And so it's genuinely sad with like the Gong Gong situation where, she's putting so much into him energetically, emotionally, and he cannot see it. And I'm sure he has his own generational trauma too, where God knows what his parents were like, right? And all that cultural stuff of like having a girl versus a boy, right? And so it feels truly tragic when I really get, melodramatic within myself about it. The hardwiring of that is beautiful in theory, and then how much it just can't be felt or appreciated because of the trauma that we've all felt to certain degrees, some way more than others.
Yep. I like to concretize these things. So look at Gong Gong, right? If Gong Gong created a part of him that was only going to be valid and be able to carry on his name if he had a son, let's just assume that was a message given to him by his family. You better have a son so that you carry on this name and this dynasty, our family. And then he didn't. But he never resolved that. Which means that every time he sees Evelyn throughout his life, he's reminded, because he didn't resolve his shit that was placed there for him, unfortunately, in whatever version of the cave metaphor exists for him and how he was programmed to think, well, then he can never be good enough.
It just trickles all the way down.
Yeah, because there's no way that Gong Gong didn't have a trauma.
Oh, no. He would have been alive during the entire revolution that took place in China.
Yeah. So when we talk about intergenerational trauma, we know also that it didn't start with Gong Gong.
Oh, no.
Who knows how long?
Who knows how long
people can make arguments
gone on.
That it's been going on since there were human beings.
I mean, and you're absolutely right. It didn't start with him. That was created by years and years and years of so very many things that people were helpless against. It's not that it's always people's fault that they've been traumatized, but it's that people don't resolve the thing that was unresolvable and assign it as unresolvable so that they can close it down. Because our brains do have the ability to accept that we can't control everything. But so long as we assign fault to ourselves for why we weren't able to complete that task, or fault to something other than ourselves, but without just accepting this is unresolvable, it's not solvable. People will some part of them will stay fractured from their core self and resentful that they were not good enough in that, and that will keep showing up time after time after time in multiple universes as an antagonist.
Yeah, I mean, and I think something too, going off of what you guys are both saying about how everybody, if you go back far enough, everyone has something, and that's what's created the thing for them that now they're unfortunately passing down, or that's staying with them. And I think, unfortunately, how we've learned to deal with that, in my anecdotal experience as a therapist, is we will use that then as a way to invalidate ourselves and to encourage continued mistreatment. What I mean by that is, well, he went through something, so it makes sense that he acts like that, so you have to just suck it up. You see a version of Evelyn doing that to Joy, where she's like, where they excuse the generational behaviors because of the context, right?
Yes.
And the simultaneously, and we see Joy do this too, which is, but I'm not giving you a hard time about liking girls. She's clearly not okay with her being gay.
Nope.
Because she thinks that her literal first thought when she finds out that Jobu is Joy, she's like, oh, you're why my daughter dates girls. And she's like, are you fucking serious, dude?
Yeah. Yeah.
Of
literally.
all the things going on, this is what you're still worried about? And I think that's also what keeps people from really working through these things, is they'll give themselves a pass because they're not as bad as their parents were about something. When I would work with younger kids in pretty heightened settings, and I would try to very delicately explain to a parent, like, actually what you're doing is abusive behavior, and they had their own generational trauma, they would get really upset with me, and it was really hard to not get to that place in this conversation where it would be upsetting because I would trigger them. No matter how I said it.
Yep.
And it would usually be followed up with some version of, and they would follow up with some version of, well, I don't hit them.
Yep.
My dad would hit me just because I scream at them. I could be hitting them. And I'm like, I know that you could be hitting them. And I know that you aren't doing that, which is good. That is progress. And that doesn't mean that everything you're still doing is okay.
Yeah.
Or isn't having its own detrimental impact. Everything gets viewed in this relative way that it's just hard. It's part of that whole idea, like I talked about before, of like holding the dialect, of like holding multiple thoughts at once, which is that you can be doing a better job than your parent and it's still causing a negative impact on your child, or it's still not enough, and you have to sit with that discomfort. I think that's what's really hard with some of more like the boomer generation, when they get this really hard feedback from their kids, is, well, I was such a better parent than my parents. And I made a lot of effort to not be like my parents. And how dare you then put me in the same wheelhouse as them? I think that's where that part gets activated too, where it goes to that extreme mode of like, now you're putting me in the same abuse bucket as my parents who abused me.
Which is the last thing I can ever let into my identity, because it's the one thing I told myself I was never going to be.
Yeah. And so that leads to, so with Joy, Evelyn, I think the work she'll probably continue to have to do if we ground this movie into, our world, is sitting in that discomfort that she's still going to fuck some stuff up, and Joy might still have hard feedback for her. And that doesn't mean that she's still not working really hard, and Joy's not seeing that too. It's still trying to keep it out of this black and white box of like, either you're a good parent or you're a bad parent.
Yep. Well, and look at how parts would work. Sometimes they isolate painful information away from our core. Moon Knight did an excellent job of displaying that. I created you. You're not supposed to see this. I created you so you didn't have to feel this. Which was a goof in writing, in my opinion, because the way it would really work is, I created you so I don't have to feel this.
Yeah, it's reverse. They reverse engineered that.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
they didn't talk to anybody before they wrote that show. They didn't talk to anybody.
No, it was close. It was so close.
And so wrong.
Part of why that sitting in it idea, why intergenerational trauma continues to happen, is because people that created a part of them that knows who their abuser are and how their abuser behaves, then labels that as shameful and pushes it away from their consciousness so hard that they cannot tolerate sitting in the information that, yes, you are doing the same exact thing. You may not be doing it to the same degree.
Yeah.
But you are doing the very thing you swore not to be, but because it's been isolated away as a shameful thing, whatever protective part comes in and swoops that right away from the consciousness and doesn't let it have it. And then because people operate in such a dissociated mess sometimes, they never sit down and reintegrate that so that they can face the truth of, I did that and it felt bad for me. Instead, what they do is that protective part comes swooping in and grabs it and says, well, no, your dad was mean to you like that so that you would be better. This is a particularly true thing for Asian culture, so I'm going to make sure we hit it, is that disapproval is, my parents were hard on me so that I would do better, so that I would do good enough to be the best.
Yeah.
Because only the best is good enough. And they were hard on me, so I have to be hard on my kids because it took my parents being hard on me for me to become that. And the truth is always that no, them being hard on you might have been necessary to set boundaries, but the lack of care that provided, that part of you that's protecting and swooping isn't acknowledging all the hours you spent crying, feeling awful and feeling you aren't good enough. And that was the whole point of Joey's character, is to show this is what that does to people. Is it makes them feel so broken that they, like Hannah said, don't have their own identity that they can even invest in, because nothing that they do is ever good enough. And that would make sense why she would become the foil for herself and become the embodiment of nihilism later.
Yeah. Ugh, I'm having a reaction to, I hate that mentality. I mean, I didn't have that from my parents, so shout out to mom and dad, but the mentality of you have to sort of like berate your kids into success, and that then you over identify with that as an adult, and then you also have to make it, and this will be slip into our next thing, have meaning to it, and so then you continue it to perpetuate the meaning for yourself, and that it'll work. But what you're talking about is like, too, in this movie, is what Evelyn can't get out of her own head to notice is that, babe, it did not, are you feeling successful, Evelyn? So it didn't work. So why are you then doing it to your kid? You know, it's that trap that people get stuck in, where they don't know how to get off the roller coaster for themselves.
Right.
It's because it doesn't ever synthesize.
Yeah.
They never get out of the reactionary state that is incapable and has no biological need to digest the information because it's still trying to survive it. It has no use for digesting and storing information. It just needs to survive till tomorrow, to just do better. And then we won't have this problem anymore. But that push that you're talking about of sit in your discomfort. Feelings exist to communicate meaning from our experiences, and we don't get to pick and choose which ones. We need them all. You cannot eat a meal where you go, I'm going to have steak, potatoes, asparagus, rice, and a cup of fruit, and say, but I'm only going to digest the fruit and the vegetables. I'm not going to digest the steak. Whatever goes into your body must be broken down into a usable form. For eating, we have stomach acid enzymes for digestion and breaking down of food that then goes through our whole system and becomes usable nutrients, and we poop out the rest. For emotional experiences, we have, or for lived experience, we have emotions to be the enzymes to digest the information, and feeling like tears or cathartic expression. That's the word I'm looking for. An outward expression of things we no longer need. We then let go. And we cry out, we talk about, we yell about, we go into the woods and scream at God and like curse his name.
Like Wolverine, a good Wolverine, kneels, knee on the ground, cry to the moon.
Right, something like that. Or, you know, like I don't know if you guys saw the video of me and Hannah in the rage room just beating the fucking shit out of some computer equipment.
Yeah, it's insane.
It was not about the computer equipment always.
Not even a little bit. And I get mad at technology a lot, and it was not about that.
But it channeled some shit to come right out, didn't it?
Sure did.
Both of us had to go like...
Both of us had to calm down. I was like, I got to take a break. I feel my fight part coming out, and it doesn't feel good.
I was like encouraging Hannah, like, yeah, get in there. She's like, okay, so I'm losing my shit right now. And then a few minutes later, I felt the same thing. It was like,
he felt the same way.
Oh, because I channeled something and it found an avenue to come out of my body through. And I went, oh, that's been stuck for a while, but I wasn't ready for that. And then I got dysregulated, and realizing like intergenerational trauma is a deep hole that we could probably talk about for hours. But if you can understand that these things get stuck in us, and once they come into our body, we then must break them down into usable form. And until we do, they're going to sit there. And the only way to do that sometimes is to bring yourself to a state of relative safety again and sit in the discomfort, realizing just because it still feels uncomfortable doesn't mean it is still dangerous. That I am still in the same situation that produced the bad feeling. And the ability to pair a relaxed muscle body with a distressed feeling is how we heal from trauma, and there is no other way. You cannot just keep staying activated to stay in control of shit to make it all stop. So then you can calm down and then you'll process. But you'll be just fine. You won't have to do the processing. You'll just be fine because everything will stop. That's what Evelyn is doing. And it doesn't work. How many times does that work, Hannah?
No times.
Never times?
Never times.
None
It's
time.
never going to work. Never, ever.
Never ever?
No.
So, Brittany, do you concur?
I concur. Because I'll tell you this, watching this movie, even in like the first beginning scenes, like even Evelyn behaving that way was making me feel like I was like, stop. Like everything, too much is happening at once, like one thing at a time. But she feels like, but she can't do that at that time.
And neither can anybody else.
Neither can anybody else, because
like that.
Something's gonna not work out.
But bringing yourself back to a point where you can calmly process, teach yourself you can sit in it, and just because it hurt you before and it still hurts now doesn't mean it's always going to hurt that way, but it will continue to hurt until you deal with your shit. And I just watched The Lion King with my child today, and like, man, the scene with Rafiki and Simba where he basically says exactly those things, where he like hits him in the head and says, it doesn't matter, it was in the past. Like, it still hurts. So, yes, the past can hurt. Looking at that, but we can choose to continue hurting from it or to learn from it.
And I think that's a great segue into our next topic.
Yeah, so we'll take a break here.
Okay, so the kind of the big idea from this movie, other than what we've talked about, is existentialism versus nihilism. And I guess first what we should do is explain the difference between those terms. So existentialism, I feel like I'd never explain this as well as I like to. So you guys can back me up and add to it.
We got you, boo.
But how I explain it to clients, because I like to dumb everything down to its, not dumb in a mean way, just make it bite-sized, is that it's this idea that you have to give something meaning from yourself. It comes from Viktor Frankl, who... not Viktor Frankl, but he's a big proponent of it, which is this idea that because he was in Auschwitz, he lost his faith in God because of that horrible experience, and then he was like, now what? Like, what drives me now? And so the concept behind it is that you have to provide meaning to yourself, and that is enough. You know, I think because people really struggle with something outside of me has to give me meaning. Some people do find that, religion is a big obvious version of that. But existentialism is this concept of like, how can I give that to myself? Or how do I make meaning of the life that I live? Which can be, like I said, the things we're talked about already. And then nihilism, which is nothing means anything. There's no big thing outside of me telling me what's up, so nothing matters because there's no meaning to anything. So it's kind of, I always think of it, you guys let me know what you think, but I always think of it as like similar, it's starting at a similar place, but coming to a different conclusion with the same information.
I think that it is definitely one way to interpret it. Like, existentialism is in order to create meaning out of nothingness, we must be able to
find meaning,
find purpose in our suffering. And we must confront the ideas that maybe things don't matter, but if I can assign my own meaning to them, I can find peace in what I can't control and make peace with it while directing my attention back onto that which I can. And nihilism would be the radical acceptance that nothing at all matters.
Yeah.
So why should I fear anything? Existentialism, is particularly existential psychology, focuses on we all have some base fears because our core fear is that we stop being alive.
Yeah. It's existential dread, existential angst, existential threat, all those kind of concepts.
That I'm either alive or I'm not, and anything that makes me not alive makes me scared.
Yeah.
And nihilism would, existentialism is that the argument is make peace with those things and accept that you never had control of them anyway. Your last day is not something you get to know. You don't get any control over when or how. But if you abandon trying to control other people and things, you will find more peace. Nihilism just says, fuck all that, and nothing matters. It doesn't matter. You don't matter. So it doesn't matter if you die, so why are you so worried? It doesn't matter. This person doesn't like you because you said fuck you to their face. Well, they don't matter, so what's it matter? They don't matter, neither do you.
Yeah, and how I interpret nihilism when I work on it with clients is more of like the depressive mode of that, which is nothing has meaning, so I'm going to sleep for 12 hours a day and lay in the dark and not try because who cares? You know, it's like, I think that's how I've encountered it as a therapist, is that very like, well, if something isn't going to give me meaning, if something's not going to come into my life and make it worthwhile or make it make sense, then nothing matters. Why try? And some clients come into sessions, like come into treatment, which I kind of find ironic, because if you're going to start therapy, it means something inside of you thinks that something's worth something.
Wait, are you saying? Oh, you brought up dialectics a couple times today. What is it that enables dialectics to be possible?
I feel like it's a trick question. I don't know the answer to it. I feel like I'm being pop quiz and my brain's like, oh no.
Did we just find your freeze part, Brittany?
Maybe.
Hannah, what is it that allows dialectics to be possible?
What allows it to be possible?
Why is it that we can have two thoughts at the same time and both be valid?
Because we hold multitudes.
Yes! Because we have...
Ben's not allowed to ask questions anymore.
I think I'll say that we can do a little psychoanalytic on me, is I think in that moment I got anxiety because I have good student anxiety is what I call it. So that's my part that wants to make sure I'm giving people the right answer. And in that moment when you asked me that question, I was like, there's a right answer. I don't feel confident that I have it, so I'm not going to say anything. Look how that works, guys. In real time.
There we go.
In real time.
in real time. And what I'm going to do, you're going to get mad at me, and I'm sorry. I love you.
Do you?
Yes. Is you just repurposed your anxiety into something positive and called it good student anxiety, which prevented you from answering a question you knew the answer to. But because you weren't sure, your freeze part went, oh, but we could get it wrong.
Better to not answer at all. Isn't that a fuck? Isn't that a total fuck?
And you see it happens that fast, even in an environment where we are safe and we can edit this out.
And this is why. And this is why when people ask me, "But you're a therapist. Why do you go to therapy?" I go, "Because babe, my nose is at the painting. My nose is against the painting. I cannot see the forest for the trees here, buddy." But yeah, I mean.
But wait. You gotta. Why is it that we can have two perceptions of something at the same time and both be true?
Because that's the gist. That's the reality. But
the reality is that there's multiple realities.
Yeah. Which
we have parts. I just wanted to point that out.
Sure.
Now, I wasn't counting on like the freezing and all that stuff happening, but that's just because it happened to Brittany.
Surprise.
Right. I just want to be super clear. Just because it happened to Brittany in this moment does not mean Brittany is less than. That's the same thing that happens to everybody.
Yeah.
It's not like, I got you, Brittany. It's we all have our things that will cause that same response in us and go, this feels like it's inconsistent with the version of me I want to present.
Well, now I'll piggyback on it and say the reason why I could resolve it that quickly and even articulate it like that is because I've worked on the part of me that struggles with being vulnerable and being okay with making a mistake. So then the secondary part, anyway, we could go on about this all day.
Right. We could, but just want to point out that idea of that multiple things can be true at the same time is because you have multiple perceptions going on at the same time. And just because you're feeling multiple things about it doesn't mean they're wrong. They might be coming from different points of view that are both equally valid. And they could both be points of view that exist inside your own head that are spawned from different experiences. You have sides of you that where answering the question wrong has gone poorly and been embarrassing. And then there's been other times where answering the question wrong has had absolutely no impact on anything and sparked a fun discussion. But which one was going to win out in that second for anybody? Brain chooses.
And because I'm in a heightened state where I know I'm being recorded and I'm going to be heard. So it ups the ante in terms of my activation.
Right. So,
Because if you would have asked me that like on your couch where we're not recording a podcast, I might have been able to answer it.
right.
Yeah.
When you weren't playing the role of expert.
Yeah.
Yep.
Isn't that interesting, guys? Look how we're all learning together by
We
doing.
really are. We really are.
But I guess going back into the movie, though, I do think Joy or Jobu Chewbacca, she names her one point in the movie. She's adopting that full, like, more nihilistic standpoint of I've seen everything and I've decided it doesn't matter. But what she doesn't realize is she's decided it doesn't matter. She just thinks that it really doesn't matter, and that's the facts of it. So let's just dive into nothingness together. But what she doesn't really realize is she still wants her mom to be there and to hold her hand through that, which I think is the part that can't truly be nihilistic within her.
Yep. I loved this Jobu character so much. Watching this is... Do you know who she is?
What do you mean?
This type of character, this type of villain, this type of antagonist that has reached this point of hyper awareness of the full truth all the time. The best villain ever has the same awareness.
Just say it.
Just say it already.
I love that you guys already know, but you also know that I'm right.
I don't even... Well, what's funny is I don't know who you're talking about. I just know
Yes.
what the genre is going to be.
It's,
The universe they live in.
it's Joker.
Really?
Joker isn't
I
insane.
guess he is nihilistic.
Is Joker insane?
Is he insane?
He's
unwell.
Sure, but
He's not well, babe. No, he's not well.
he's nihilistic.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point of, like, if we're getting into Dark Knight, like, that category,
Yes.
definitely that
Version.
version of him, burning the cash version.
All versions. I mean, that version
Well, I mean,
in particular.
that's the version I'm aware of. Because you know me. I've been watching the movies, and that's about it.
Right, and that's fine. But, like, looking at, like, what he typically stands for is he has hyper rationality. He doesn't dissociate into different parts of himself. He's the same all the time, and he doesn't feel that switch depending on which version you're seeing. But most of the versions of Joker, you don't see a switch. He's always the same. He sees the truth in people's behaviors. Heath Ledger's was really good at explaining it through his anarchist point of view, which is nihilism, basically. But looking at that nothing matters, none of it matters, and people will always do at the core what they do regardless of the situation, and watch, none of it matters. But the Jobu and that version of Joy that has fully adopted this nihilism, when you meet her and she's antagonizing this particular version of Evelyn that's failed at everything,
Yeah.
it has this constant acknowledgement of the truth all the time, that it's all wired from the same shit. There was the scene where she's like, where they start doing the thing where they're really multiversing really actively, and they did some really cool effects on it, but where she's reaching in through the universe and, like, allowing whatever weapon she's having to change forms rapidly.
Oh, yeah.
And she tells her mom, like, you see, now you feel it like I do, that it's all the same. It's all the same. No matter what you're trying to grab a hold of, it's all the same. It just changes context. Like, a hammer is equally useful and useless depending on what situation we're in. Like, that wasn't exactly like what she said there, but, like, watching her change things, you realize these are all built of the same stuff, and you can change it to make it into an adaptive form for what you need it to be right now. Joker is like that, where he sees the full truth all the time, and he doesn't alternate and dissociate into things. And Jobu, much like that, did that. And that's what makes her so scary, that nihilistic, nothing matters, but she can also see truths that people who are bound to what their parts tell them cannot. And you see that, like, conflict between, before Evelyn goes Nova, she's so bound by trying to survive her reality in this tax thing and how she can get back to solve this tax problem that's still going to threaten her business and make her look bad in the eyes of her dad, that she can't even see that her husband, she wrote this note that her other person on a divorce decree.
Yeah.
And she hasn't even realized it yet. And he's trying to get her attention to divorce her. And also, this version of her daughter just killed 6 men with giant floppy dildos. Because nothing matters. So what difference would it make? I can kill them equally well with samurai swords or bullets or floppy dildos.
Or glitter. She makes the one guy puke up glitter and then he explodes into glitter.
Right. That seeing that hard truth all the time is what makes that nihilism such a valuable trait in a villain.
Yeah.
Is there something you are wanting me to say that I'm...
No, I've just been talking a lot.
Oh, okay.
Hannah, what do you see in this
Yes.
existentialism versus nihilism fight in this movie?
I mean, everything that you guys both said make a lot of sense, and it doesn't feel like there's anything to add, I guess.
No.
No?
This is your favorite movie.
It is my favorite movie. It is my
So
favorite
what do you want
movie.
to say about Joy and her presentation and these concepts?
I think that Joy definitely presents as having nihilism. I think that she has a... So I think that it makes a lot of sense that Joy is nihilistic, because I feel like that is based on experiencing all the intergenerational trauma that she's experiencing from her mother. So I think it makes a lot of sense for her to be that way. I think it makes a lot of sense for her to, even when she can see everything, that she still needs her mom. I think that it makes a lot of sense that this is where Jobu is.
I'm going to tie it back to the Joker just to be obnoxious, but like, despite Joker being someone who sees the truth of everything all the time and stays hyper-rational, much like Joy, who does he need?
Batman.
He needs Batman, doesn't he? Joy needs her mom. There's something if nothing matters, but you still need something that you're not getting. Sounds kind of like a paradox, doesn't it?
Well, I'll say this is Joy. Maybe you can piggyback on this. Is Joy? I assume, based on what the little they kind of provide about this, seems like she's struggling with maybe depression.
Yeah.
And I guess and so we see that in the movie because I don't even, maybe I'm just reading into it, but I know there is the scene where Evelyn's holding her hands, Joy's hands, in that sex room. I don't know how else to describe it. Sex dungeon. And she's like, I know you have a lot of feelings, and they're like sad. And she's trying to connect with her in that moment. And so I think what's interesting about this movie is that how much is Joy's depression and this trauma influencing her perception of seeing everything, right? And how that what she takes from that is that sort of very defeatist, nihilistic approach, and then still doesn't have the self-awareness, which I think is also where she's caught up in her depression still, that she's still striving for her mother's approval. She still wants her mommy to come with her to the bagel temple, look into the bagel, and understand her.
Yeah.
Even within her very intense nihilistic approach identity, she still wants her mom to say, I get it, and to comfort her.
Right. Even when most of her has locked into this idea that we find peace in being both so locked into nothing matters that we enable our absurdist side to take over, that if nothing matters, I may as well do it in the most ridiculous way I can think of and entertain myself while reinforcing the message that nothing matters anyway. But yet she still can't ignore or can't turn off the part of her that needs her mom.
Yeah.
And the second that gets an avenue to grab on and reactivate, who's staring at that everything bagel? Who's she tracking down? The version of her mom that can give her what the mom from her universe can't because she's gone.
Yeah.
And she could never, ever stitch that wound. So she seeks the first way that she can. And if she can't get it from those other Evelyns, what does she do?
She kills them.
She kills them.
She kills them in every other universe.
But why does she do that?
Because she can't tolerate it.
Right?
She can't sit in the discomfort.
She can't sit in the discomfort of the situation, and so she's not getting what she needs, and so she gets rid of she executes them.
Yeah.
She's still chasing something, but trying to behave as if she's not. And she's stuck in that
She's still
quandary.
trying to convince herself that she doesn't really need her mom.
Because that's how she keeps herself what?
Safe. Yeah. It's the story she's telling herself. And because we all have stories we're telling ourselves, that's why, like I said, therapists go to therapy, is we need someone outside of us a lot of the times to give us that feedback that, you're telling me this and your actions are actually not aligning with what you're saying. What's that about? And I think if I said that to Jobu, they would just, I don't know, slice me in half with a banana.
Probably. Well, and then what's interesting is that her dad has found meaning.
Yeah.
Her dad has meaning in that he believes in kindness, and he believes and you can just tell that he is. What was really interesting about the opening scene in the laundromat is that you see Evelyn respond to all of these people in this very specific way that's kind of like short-tempered, annoyed, frustrated. And then you see Waymond come in and he reacts with all these people in completely different ways.
He has a personal relationship with people. He's dancing with them. He's like
dancing
joking
with them. He's talking to them. He's enjoying them. And that's because he has found meaning. And so it's really interesting to have Joy, who's in some ways only responding to her mother and not as much responding to her father and what he's about. And I don't know if and maybe that's because we only saw that part of the story, and because
the story's about the two of them.
Because the story's about the two of them and not necessarily about her father. But really interesting that he has found meaning that has made his life, and for him to have a daughter who doesn't believe in anything. And how interesting that would be when you have someone who's so clearly dedicated to something and you're not able to see past the stuff that happens with mom.
which I think is why throughout time, Nietzsche and nihilism remains an interesting study, particularly for 19-year-old college students taking philosophy courses to debate while they're so up their own asses that they actually still believe that they could create a reality where nothing matters.
Yeah. I don't, use like paper tender. I barter for all the things that I need.
Oh my God.
That's my impression of a 19-year-old who just discovered nihilism.
Because money doesn't actually matter and none of this matters. So like I should be able to trade a rock.
What are rules? What are pants? Why go to class on time? and yeah, I think that that's where Joy is, which I think also says how much of her child part is still activated, because that is like a younger perspective of it. Mm-hmm. Is, then fuck it, and I'm gonna, act out. What she's doing is she's acting out.
Yep.
To get her mom's attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So that her mom can tell her, because it does. I don't know. I mean, this is more of something I'm contemplating in the moment now. Go. When she's with her mom and they're standing next to each other in that temple staring at the bagel, I wonder how much of it is, I think she does kind of say this, so remind me if I'm forgetting this part, how much she wants her mom to agree with her versus how much she wants her mom to give her meaning and actually tell her, no, stuff does matter. And it's something, I don't know, whatever it is. I don't think there's necessarily a specific answer there, but, of how much sometimes when we think we want someone to agree, we actually want them to say the opposite. Ugh, so annoying, human psychology.
Right, because at our core, we don't want people to agree with us blindly because there's no value to that.
Yeah.
But we do want to be validated.
And comforted with that.
That even if we're wrong, our perspective and feelings are real. And when the first thing out of somebody's mouth is trying to fix, contain, manage, or control somebody's feelings, they're taking away their right to have an experience of life. And people really don't like that. They really don't like that at all. And I think the most powerful scene of this whole movie that demonstrated that is when Evelyn finally got power back over the situation and got it, she turned them both into rocks. Sitting on the edge of the Grand Canyon, where they were both so incredibly bland, and I believe they were gray.
There's no sound.
There's no
Literally
sound.
no sound.
No sound.
Not even music underneath them, like a score.
Nothing. And they just sit and acknowledge, and they sit in each other's feelings. And the most change that happens in that relationship is right then, where they slow everything down and cut through all the bullshit and realize that they are contending with this ever-evolving cycle of parts that aren't meeting each other's needs and are constantly at war to get those needs met, and will do whatever they have to define the world in a way that enables that part to do its function to get its need met. And for the child part, I have a 5-year-old. I assure you, if you ignore them, they will get absurd really quick. If they have a need, they will get absurd until you meet that need, and they will increase the levels of absurdity to get their need met.
Yeah. As a child therapist, I've also witnessed this phenomenon that you speak of.
Have you?
Yes. Yes.
I'm sure as a person who's dealt with adult humans, you've also noticed this phenomenon.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick pause here.
And I think so. What's still so interesting about that, which is why I wonder, it's making me think of how much depression plays in this, is that even when her mom kind of does agree with her and gets on board with it and is in common ground with her about the nihilism, she's still not looking satisfied, Jobu. Like, she almost looks further irritated now that her mom is on board with it. And I think it's that part of us that thinks that, especially if we struggle with depression, but this can be other things too, that if I just get this one thing, that everything will make sense or everything will fit into place, that magical thinking we've talked about in numerous episodes.
Yes.
And so it's interesting to kind of watch that pass over Jobu in that way. Because what you were talking about, Hannah, is that you're right, that she does have a parent that has found meaning in his life. You know, like his whole monologue about being kind.
Yes.
Is him trying to tell Evelyn and everybody else that is enough. Like, being kind is beautiful and meaningful, and that is powerful. And it's not necessarily this like weak passive strength. Like when he's the movie star version of himself and he's saying it is strategic. It's not me just taking it on the chin all the time and being weak. I'm making an active choice that's in alignment with my value, with my meaning. And that is also a way to fight. And then Evelyn figures that out too. But I wonder with Jobu actually more, is I wonder how much she's actually really looking for meaning, and how much of her like sadness is infecting how she's perceiving all these realities. And her like kind of canceling out her father. And I'm sure now she's witnessed so many people who have found meaning and have made it worthwhile. And she's canceling out all that information to fit her confirmation bias, which is that it's all meaningless.
I think she's doing exactly that. She's actively rejecting it because she has identified a world where she can have hope and something matters, or she could be like her dad and just show people kindness anyway, is just another pathway to pain for her. And she can't accept that, because I think Joy, much like, and especially Jobu, much like Evelyn, views his silliness, his investment in making little things that quote unquote don't matter. Just happy. Like putting little googly eyes on the laundry.
Or moving a bag because they didn't seem happy.
They're happier upstairs.
They're happier upstairs.
Which is a ridiculous statement, but why does it matter? And if it felt that way, then why not do that? But to her, that would be weakness, because that would be allowing another thing that could be taken away from her, when no matter what, it's still not good enough for mom. And I think the way that that's shown over and over is brilliant. And I'll cover it more in final thoughts a little bit, but like the way that dad is shown, or grandpa is shown, as having this mind gone, dementia, and then shows up in this rocket-powered wheelchair, driving as a central antagonist or secondary antagonist behind the things that, even in that universe, for Evelyn, she's still not good enough for him, because she won't kill her daughter to take away an avenue for Jobu to destroy the world through. And that's the only way to fight her. And even still, she can't be good enough, which means she can't let Joey be good enough. And you just see this like endless cycle over and over. This movie finds ways to slap you with it over and over and over again, that it does feel this hopeless. It is this powerful. It is this omnipresent. And no matter what, there's no win. But for Jobu, she's created this narrative for herself that nihilism is the only way to protect myself from it, and nothing matters. But yet the part of her that still needs her mom wins out anyway.
Yeah. Because I think the version of nihilism she wants to adopt, similar to the 19-year-olds that we were making fun of earlier, is wanting it to make it so that you're almost like above the fray.
That you're above the pain.
Yeah, you're above it all.
Yeah.
Because you see it for what it is. And it's this very like cool kid energy. And she wants to be that. Jobu wants to be that. And she like masquerades behind all these crazy costumes and cool girl kind of energy. And she can't leave her mom alone. I mean, that's what Evelyn says at the very end. She goes, what does it mean then that through all this shit, you know, we still end up together and we want to be together? Like that has to mean something.
Yeah.
You know, even if, and that's going back to like existentialism, like nothing's giving it meaning from outside. We are deciding it has meaning because our actions are dictating that, and because we can admit that to ourselves. And that is enough.
And that's why throughout time, even in the darkest moments, those who have a thing to believe in, those who have a way to connect to their why, can endure anyhow. Which, ironically enough, do you know who Franco was quoting? And it's usually Franco who gets assigned the quote of a man who has a why can endure anyhow. Do you know who he's quoting?
Nope.
Nietzsche.
No shit.
No shit. Even Nietzsche himself, eventually in his own books, argued why nihilism is bullshit. Because of existentialism. And that true peace is only found in assigning meaning to that which we can control and letting go of what we cannot, so that we can be the best version of ourselves that can exist now. Free from the burdens of what failures we had in the past or mistakes we made, but empowered with the knowledge of how to not do it again. And that's exactly what happened at the end of this movie. We see a version of Evelyn that has been a failure over and over and unburdens herself from all of that, letting it go. When you see that smile kind of crack across her face as you watch her let it all go.
Yeah, like the very, very last scene where she's finally starting to feel it, like to feel the beauty of the minutia of life, if you will. That's how we bring these big flighty concepts, you know, existentialism. It's like such a huge ass word, like literally and conceptually, is like, how do we bring that into our actual lives in a way that helps us? Is that sort of mindfulness practice, is like, how can we be present? Because the juxtaposition of then and now too, like the first scene and the last scene, is how it's not this, I like it in that the setting is no different. The characters are no different. You know what I mean? And in all actualities, it's all the same. It's how she is interpreting it and how she's being present with it too.
Yeah.
And that she no longer needs to fracture to be strong enough to handle it.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be anybody's fault. And it doesn't have to be, who do we have to deal with in order to get on the other side of this? Because it's like, I mean, the corny thing people say is like, it's not the destination, it's the journey. But I think that's true with this too, is like that concept is, this is the part that matters, is what you're doing day to day. And she's so caught up in the journey. And I think so is Jobu too.
The destination, she's caught up in the destination.
That's what I mean. Sorry. Yeah. The destination is they're not being cognizant of what's actually occurring. Because what's cool, what is cool that Jobu's missing, it's more like the absurdism approach, which I don't know a ton about, but I like it, so I'm going to learn more about it. Is like, if nothing matters, which is kind of how they end in that ending scene too, when they're in the parking lot, then why not have fun? Why not enjoy each other? Why not seek pleasure? You know what I mean? Why not wear the funny costumes? Not because who gives a shit, in that very like nothing matters till we die energy, but more of like nothing matters, let's have fun in a way that's not harmful. Because I think that's what, with the interpretation of nihilism, at least how Jobu takes it, is like nothing matters, so who cares who we hurt? Mm-hmm. Whereas I think, from what I understand of it, the absurdism's approach is more like individual, in that nothing matters, so do with it what you will, in a way that's like, life's absurd, let's laugh at it.
Well, exactly.
But we're not going to harm people, because who gives a shit?
Right. I mean, look at David Bowie. Especially when he evolved, especially when the Ziggy Stardust time period, where like he was so androgynous. Mm-hmm. At that point in time, that's so many no-nos.
Yeah.
For masculinity and being famous, and as a man, especially somebody that has such like a deep, rich English voice. Mm-hmm. You know, like for him to take those risks and like point out the absurdity of it. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be as absurd as possible.
Yeah.
But look at the number of people that criticized him and lived by, like, against everything that he stood for, that knew his name and know his songs. And who's the one that's famous? Mm-hmm. The one that did the absurd thing, or the one that conformed? Mm-hmm. And realizing sometimes that success does not come from conformity. Success does not come from adhering to rules that one cannot win. Like, you're playing a game you can't win, and adhering stronger to the game you can't win doesn't make you win it any better.
And I think we're going through an interesting time right now, like we keep referencing, where people are on that tip of like nihilism, absurdism, which is finally identifying how much of what we are dictated by are constructs.
Well, how many people are out there like having absurdist hairstyles that are bananas colors, and like have whatever piercing occurred to them, not like the ones that society determined were acceptable, but like, I want to get pierced somewhere on this line of my neck below my ear because I feel like it. And you're just gonna have to deal with it. It doesn't matter why I got it. Like, oh, well, it's okay to get your ear pierced or your eyebrow pierced, or but why did you get your neck pierced? Blah, blah, blah. Watch people get all bent out of shape with it, and them going, who gives a shit? It's my body. I'll do what the fuck I want.
Yeah.
And I think there is a strong movement that's reaching that point, that people are realizing no matter how strongly I adhere to the rules of boomer society, I can't fucking win the game. So fuck the game.
Yeah.
And I'll do what I want. And I will do it in whatever way occurs to me.
Which is connecting, and then we can wrap this up because I know we're kind of going on a tangent, is the New York Times, I believe it was the New York Times, just recently released an article that people have been talking about on like TikTok and stuff, which is, are millennials having midlife crises now that they're old enough to have them?
Yes.
And people are saying, no, not in the way that they have been, because of what you're bringing up, that there isn't been like that we've been in constant crisis, so we're not having it the way we did, because of there's this breaking down, because we're not buying into the rules that have been in play, because like you said, they haven't worked out. And so now it's more like we are examining things in a different way. We're breaking down constructs, the generation below us even more so because of this thing you're bringing up. So it's kind of flipping on its head even in like these articles of like, because midlife crisis is existentialism. Like I'm having a existential panic, existential freak out, existential crisis, whatever. And I think we're in an evolving state right now around this stuff. And it's really interesting to witness. Interesting is too small of a word for it, but
well, it's abandonment of social norms on a mass scale to the point that they can't be enforced anymore to control. Like, how many of us were told we can't get tattoos or certain haircuts because you won't even be able to get a job at McDonald's?
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
You're selling $10 hamburgers to 50 people in a half hour because you're so efficient at it at a margin of $6 per $10 hamburger of profit. And you got 4 people working in this store at $6 an hour. These Zennials looked at them and went, fuck you.
Yeah.
You want me to make money for you? You pay me a livable wage or I don't work and break your system. And I will love it. And you will have to hire me with whatever fucking tattoo I want, visible wherever I want. And they are taking power back where we were still suckling at the power teat trying to play the game and win. And
we're the Evelyn in this situation.
But
we have been.
We have been, but this midlife crisis that the millennials are hitting is watching what these Zoomers are doing and going, you know what, Mom? I'm not taking your shit anymore. You know what, boss? I can work for myself now. The avenue, you're going to fire me the second you don't need me and restructure the company, and you're not going to pay me shit. So why should I work for you anymore when I can work for myself? Hannah did it. You make more money now than you ever made in your whole life, don't you?
Sure do.
So I have more thoughts on this, but this is gonna like delve into more treatment territory. So should we take a break here?
Yep.
All right. So I think just piggybacking on the whole discussion we're having is, and me thinking about treatment instead of thinking about a specific character, but I guess this could work for Evelyn or Joy, maybe more Joy, because I don't know. I'm just gonna pick that. Is I do have clients because of all the things happening in the world right now, climate change especially, but also the economy, stuff like that. Like I have a lot of clients, a lot of younger clients, like teenagers, coming in with this very like defeatist, nihilistic mindset that's feeding into their anxiety, depression, yada yada, right?
Yep.
And then and even older people too, like what do I do because it seems meaningless, right? Like that is something that's coming up in therapy a lot for people. And so when I do that work with people, and maybe I would have done this work with Joy if she'd come in pre-Jobu, right? One, do psychoeducation, existentialism, nihilism, that stuff. And then I talk about how do we make meaning? Because we're talking a lot about you just have to make meaning. But how do you actually go about doing that? So when I do it with clients is first, obviously we always have to make sure that they feel safe. So you have to make sure that none of these things that are causing these issues are things that they have to be safe from, like on a day-to-day safety level. Then 2, what I like to do with people, it depends on where they're at, but is we will talk about what do you care about? Like what does give you meaning? What are your values? Sometimes I'll do a values inventory with them. You can just Google that and find different versions of it. And sometimes I'll actually there's one that I do with people that's from the DBT handbook, which is what are my actual values, which is what are my ideal values. So what are the things that I tell people I care about versus how I actually spend my time. And a lot of times those things are not matching.
Yeah.
When I do that work with people, I think to do that work with people.
Which is what cognitive dissonance actually is, which is another grade A term people use wrong, is the difference between what you say and do.
Yeah. And so first thing we have to do is what can give you meaning? What does feel true to you? When I lay a bunch of values in front of you, what hits you as ooh, that feels important? And then being mindful of how do I actually practice those values? And that can be a place to start for some people. Another work I do with people too is talking about radical acceptance, which you referenced, Ben, earlier, which is I'll have them draw a circle. Ironic, because this movie, like the bagel, and I will say, inside the circle, we're going to put all the things that you have control over, which is really just yourself and your actions and your behaviors. And that's pretty much it. And your boundaries and your limits, that kind of stuff too. And then outside of that circle is everything else. And so it's kind of like not a joke when I do it with people because it doesn't really change from that. But I think it helps to write it out, to have like a visual of it. And then to really work on radically accepting that other people, the future, multiverses in which it could have gone this way, it could have gone that way. You know, all these things are out of our control. We'll never be able to manage for those. We'll never be able to do so much, work so hard, whatever, that those things aren't out of your control to a certain extent. And I also tell people, like, your emotions too. Like, you'll have an emotional reaction and you're still in control of how you engage with those emotions. Right. And I think that helps people also figure out, like, where am I putting my energy? You know, with joy, I think we would have to really focus on your mom is outside of that circle. Your mom is not in that circle. And how do we work on that and sit in the discomfort of that? And then why does it matter about your mom? And that can then tie to values work. So you can do processing in there too. So it's, as much as I can get into lofty kind of processing with people, and sometimes that is helpful to gain insight, I think what I like about this is that I give people, like, we have practical exercises we do that really helps them understand what they're doing. Because they can say all the right things. A lot of times people complain in like therapy that my therapist isn't so self-aware. Like, I know enough. Like, I know why I do the things I do. Yeah, and what are you going to do about it? And so I like these approaches because it challenges my clients, or in this situation, Joy, to actually be, you're telling me these are your values. You're telling me you don't give a shit, you know, whatever. And you keep trying to do this. So we have to reconcile that. Like, what's getting in the way of really acknowledging that, you know? And then what I like about existentialism when I practice it with clients is that ideally it will empower them. You know, like, you can find meaning. You get to decide what's meaningful to you. So when I work with clients and they're struggling with that nihilism, I will say, like, there are a lot of things that are out of our control. So validating that too, because there's a lot of real stressors that I'm sometimes like, oof, when my clients bring them up to me, I'm like, I fucking know it. And do we want to get involved with a social justice group? Do you want to do something about, like, climate change on the ground level? You know, like, connecting it in a place where you do feel like you have action that's tied to meaning, and that you're just not floating on a rock and hoping nothing happens along the way. You know, I think that nihilism part has so much disempowerment in it when people are struggling with it.
It does. And when you're stuck in that spot of everything's going to just blow up on me eventually, well, like, the world's just going to, you know, like, melt into lava, basically. Well, good luck telling your body that it can be calm when you're telling it it's going to broil alive in lava. And you're just like, well, it doesn't matter, it's just going to happen anyway. Like, okay, well, you're not less afraid of it because of that, are you? No, I'm I need to be keeping afraid of it and keep watching it like,
And then part of that existential work is that we talked about before, like, building up a sense of identity. So with Joy, you know, I would also maybe challenge her of, like, what do you like that's just you? And building up a sense of the things that you like, and how do we attach that to values and meaning and all that work. So there's other, like, little minutia things I could do with Joy, but I think if she or someone like her were in my office, I would start doing those exercises with her. And I like that because I do work with people where we have to radically accept that as of right now, maybe forever, your parent isn't going to change. And if we keep banging our head against that wall, we're going to, like, it's just bringing us suffering. So how do we find control, find empowerment in things that are actually in our control? And then things sometimes will fall into place after the fact, but we can't know that. We can't know the future. So we just have to radically accept that too. It's all radical acceptance, sitting in discomfort and being mindful of, like, what is meaningful to you, and let's attach action to that. So that's my treatment.
well said. Hannah, you want to go first? Or you want me to go?
I'll go.
Yay, Hannah.
So, as I was thinking about this film, I was thinking about what it would be like, because I do think that Evelyn and Waymond would benefit from couples therapy. And I think at the same time, which is what I've kind of talked about before, is that I don't know how far it could go before Evelyn just got sent to her own individual therapy.
Not very.
Yeah, I don't think it would go very far. And I also just wanted to talk about in general how we do see her changing some of her behaviors on her own because she has had this major insight, this meaning change that she now has meaning in her life. And so there is a chance that couples therapy could work, but I think it would be the assessment that I would do. I think could rule it out, but I'm not really sure. It would be a little bit different. It'd be interesting to see if she could continue those behaviors. A lot of times when I have couples who come in and they'll say that they tried to do something and it worked for a month, then they stop doing it. Or they always say it's going to be better and then they do it for a couple weeks and then they don't, and then they stop doing it. And so I think it would be interesting to see if Evelyn could hold on to the momentum and the connection that she has with Waymond once she's had this final realization. And one of the other things I wanted to bring up, talking about divorce, when I have a couple in my office in general, divorce is not allowed to be on the table while we are doing active work towards helping the relationship. And that would be a discussion that I would have with Evelyn and Waymond, especially with him filing, that this can't go any further, and that has to be a neutral place in this room, because if divorce is being used as a threat, that there's no work to be done on the relationship. I can't hold a relationship up when the rug is getting pulled out from underneath it whenever they have a big fight or whenever something happens. And I have had couples who have still used the word divorce after when we were working together, and I've had to have a come to Jesus talk with them, even though I don't believe in any of that shit, about what are we doing here? What the fuck are we doing here? Because if you're just going to threaten divorce, then this is no longer a safe space. This is no longer a place where we can discuss the relationship because you've already made a decision. Mm-hmm. And so, but I do think that some of the work that could be done, especially because, like I said, Evelyn just seems so much more connected to Waymond and wants to be connected to him. And you even see that a little bit before she changes, before she kind of has her final realization. You see that when they're talking about the divorce and she starts to realize how serious this is, and that seems to have a pretty big impact on her.
She said we made a promise or something.
She did. She said we made a promise, and I think that she is just very disconnected, like we've been talking about. She's very disconnected from everything. And so it could also be the case where they come into my office and she's still really disconnected about other parts of her life that make it really hard to work on her relationship. Mm. So like I said, there's a chance that Evelyn I would have to send her to individual, or I would not be able to see them at all, which sometimes happens. Sometimes I can't say that that's what needs to happen, but sometimes I have to say something like, I don't think we can go any further in this until both of you get individual therapy. Mm-hmm. And then you come back to me, and however long that is, and then we can do the work. So just remember, when you're a couples therapist and when you're working with people, that assessment that we do in the beginning is really fucking important. And it's also important to continue to assess the relationship as you're working with the couple. Because part of the reason why I think people don't like working with couples is because it's like hitting your head against the wall. It takes a while for them to trust and believe you, which is natural and normal. And they can never get to that point. There's a lot more work that's done in couples besides the communication skills that I teach. because really what I'm trying to do is help them hear each other.
Yeah.
Because kind of like we already said today, being able to be heard and validated is the only thing we really want as humans.
Because what's still left open-ended in this movie, which they'd have to talk about in couples, is why did it get to the point where you felt like you had to file for divorce for Evelyn to hear you?
Yeah.
Which she demonstrates even in him telling her why, is she argues with him over his own feelings.
Yes, she does.
And that will sink a marriage so fast. And it's why I think a lot of people have exactly that sort of, nope. Couples? No. Because it's so much parts. It's so much intercycling parts that are just screaming to get ancient needs met.
Another part of the work that I do is we talk about what are the traumas that you're both bringing to the table here. What are the traumas you both experienced in your families that has had this kind of an outcome? And now here you are together, both coming from different types of traumas, different types of experiences. And now you're trying to merge those into one, and you can't do it. Because it's just not, because a part of it is just acknowledging that each of you has had different experiences. As similar as they may be, they also may be very, very far apart. So that's what I would do with Evelyn and Waymond.
I want to take Jobu.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. Who's got the worst story? That's the one I want. But that's where people often have the room for the most growth and also need the most acknowledgement of their existence and help seeing that, yes, you can be safe again. Yes, you can tolerate being vulnerable again. And if you want to have a complete experience with life, you have to be able to get out of war mode. And for Jobu, why I am particularly intrigued by her as a potential client is she has herself so looped into this identity, this narrative. She tells herself of how she's going to keep herself safe and all of the rules that she has to follow and all of the dissociation she has to do to enable herself to just callously exterminate anything that counters that narrative, because that's how she's keeping herself safe. Well, in a reality where you can't time travel, except internally, the ability to exterminate all your threats doesn't exist. But if that's the only narrative you entertain is the message, I have to be hostile to all of my threats, well, you have to stay pretty dissociated to operate that mode all the time. And that takes a whole lot of energy that leaves you fucking exhausted in the moments where nobody sees you and you shut down for days and have no energy to do anything with anybody or yourself, barely get out of bed. And I think the thing we haven't acknowledged for Jobu, why she's on her mission, we haven't even said it, is the person who fractured her mind by driving her so hard was her version of Evelyn, who was the most successful version. And that Alpha Waymond and this version and Jobu both simultaneously looking for her to find. And Jobu's looking for every version, Waymond's looking for the least successful one to find the one that has the most growth to make, to be the one that can stop this existential threat. This movie's writing is so brilliantly in touch with all of it, all the time, in everything that they were doing, that the way they depict Jobu as this person, she is that dude in college that was so fucking exhausting that everybody, like, for some reason would still have in their group. They'd be like, well, nothing matters anyway, so... Like,
can I play a devil's advocate for a second?
like, right, like, communism actually works as a concept. And you just go like...
So do Oreos.
Right? And Oreos actually make me happy.
Exactly.
Communism doesn't. Because human evil is still real, and you can't actually... Well, if we could just extricate human evil from... Like, well, you can't.
You sure can't.
So, Like, you'll just have the same problem in a different way. Like, not to take it into political argument, just like understanding it's all the same at the root of it, right? Like, it's all the same. And that's what this point is doing. And what Jobu misses is by trying to tell herself it's all the same. And if you could just, she keeps herself so dissociated that she can operate a version of herself where she can make that true and keep her needs met, except for the one she needs met most. But if she can just keep that one contained, which she can't, then she can get all her other needs to stop by exterminating all of her central antagonists and all the versions in which she exists. And people try to do that in their mind. Yes, this is a metaphor, but people try to do that in their mind. I'm going to shut out every memory of my mother. She won't have any access to me, and then she can't hurt me anymore, because if I exterminate her from my life now and every memory of her, I don't think about her ever. That sounds like it takes a lot of energy to lock her out of everything with a brain that spontaneously accesses information as it sees fit and as is needed. So if somebody triggers a memory of your mom, your brain's going to go, we have a reference file for this, and throw it right back in your brain, no matter what you've told it. Because it's going to say, this is relevant to your survival because it references file QXZ1797. And that's relevant right now. And then you're fighting everyone again. You made me think about my mom. I got to get you out of my life. And all of a sudden, you're this intergenerational being that's connected to nothing and no one. And nothing feels good because the one need that you have, you won't acknowledge and make yourself vulnerable to again. So I think doing treatment with her on a very, very existential basis and a lot of person-centered of, we're going to create space for you to sit in your own bullshit. And I'm not going to sit here and try to bust it, because if I do, then you'll beat me with whatever hilarious object occurred to you in the moment until I'm dead. But you'll still have the same problem. And I think I would take a very Rogerian approach almost with this person and like working existentialism to tolerance. But this idea of like, I'm going to let you sit in your own contradictions without becoming another antagonist for you. But I'm just going to point it out and go, so you're saying you feel driven to spend all of your energy time traveling through all of existence in infinite multiverses that have no end to kill every version of your mother.
Yeah, she's the kind of client that would argue with your reflection of what she just said. Yeah, potentially.
Yeah, I'm going to solve it. I'm going to get to the end of the thing. Like, but you acknowledged that it's also infinite multiverses that have no end. I'm wondering when infinite wins. And you'd have to be very careful with how you play that and slow. But I think I would take that kind of approach of like, I'm just going to reflect your bullshit back to you and let you sort it out, because eventually it will defeat itself. I mean, she'll need more care than that, but that would be the direction I'd want to go, and why, because I think finding those kinds of cases is most interesting to me, to see how intertwined into these dependent realities people get that throw themselves, that are so desperately fighting a catch-22 that they throw themselves into another one and don't realize that it's a trap.
No, I think it's a good approach. It's almost like the therapeutic version of malicious compliance, where I'm like, you're right. Your mom sounds like she really hurts you. And then you don't say anything else, and you're just like validating, agreeing. And then the fight in them starts to, they have to sit in the discomfort of it's not going to be a fight.
Which means their fight part can't solve their problem this time.
Yep.
But sometimes yet they try it anyway, and they go like, well, you're a fucking terrible therapist. I hate you.
Well, I didn't say that my mom was a bitch. I'd be like, well, I didn't say you're right. I didn't, you didn't say your mom was a bitch. And then they're like,
And then you earn a butt plug trophy.
Yeah. Oh God, that part.
It was hysterical.
I mean, I guess with that we can find it if we can go into final thoughts. All right, we'll take one last break here. Okay, well, I'll go first with final thoughts. So I've seen this movie 3 times now. I saw it in theaters with Hannah, and then I've seen it 2 times since. And I will say every time I've watched it, it's grown for me. And that, to be quite honest, this is not a cool kid opinion, but when I first saw it, I thought it was a good movie, but I didn't feel moved by it the way that I could see it was obviously moving other people, which was interesting for me. And I think the more I watch it, the more I want to understand the literal plot, because I think the first time I saw it too, I was so like trying to figure out what was happening literally that I think it didn't allow me to kind of fall into it enough to be kind of moved by it emotionally, because I think I was like, what is happening? And so the more I watch it, I think because I get more comfortable with the actual plot itself, it sort of allows me to enjoy it more and to get into it more. So I would say I think it's a beautiful movie. I think it definitely deserves everything it won. I don't know if I would necessarily seek it out to watch it again, like on my own. I might watch it if they wanted to watch it. But so it's not necessarily like a comfort movie for me, the way that I think it's become for a lot of people.
No.
But I would say it's beautiful. I love that it's different and weird. I love that it's being acknowledged like critically, even though it's so different and so weird. And I think the acting's beautiful. I think it's just a splendid movie. And I also love, if nothing else, I love the costuming of Jobu and her makeup. And Stephanie Hsu, I hope that she keeps getting really cool roles, because I think she is a star. And I'm excited to see what she continues to do. You know, Awkwafina was supposed to play that part?
Really?
And then she had to drop out, I think, or something like that. So they had to recast it, which I was like the universe right there. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think she could have, no offense to her, Awkwafina, but I don't think she could have pulled off the sort of like je ne sais quoi, like the magic Stephanie brought to the role, and how she played her. How like weird and like eccentric she kind of played her. And if you watch the audition for the part that you can find online, so many of the choices she makes in the movie as Jobu, she was already doing in the audition.
Oh, wow.
Which tells you so much about how perfect she was for the role. Even at one point she says sucked into a bagel, just she says it, and the director off camera goes, "Can you sing that?" And she does the actual melody that they keep in the movie. She goes, "Sucked into a bagel." Like, she just off the top of her head seemed like she was just fully in line with what the directors were looking for. So I love everything about that. So I think it's a beautiful movie. Like I said, I don't know if I'll necessarily like watch it over and over again like other movies, but I'm really glad it exists. I'm glad it's won all the awards and everything like that. So I'll throw it to, I think Hannah should be last because she loves this movie.
Okay.
So Ben, as the first time watcher of this movie, I'm interested in what you thought.
I loved it. Mm-hmm. It spoke to me immediately. It took me 2 starts to get through the beginning because it's so jarring and unpleasant.
So overstimulating.
I was like, okay, this is not one I can watch at my normal time to watch movies, which is late as fuck.
Yeah.
When everything stops for me and everyone goes to sleep and no one needs anything from me. Is when I can finally unplug and suspend reality and like watch a movie the way I want to. Mm-hmm. Especially to do this. Mm-hmm. And especially with a movie like this. I was like, okay, we're going to have to not do that this way with this one. Because like, and also I was like, ooh, this is going to be a tough sell for my wife. Because like that's to me so much chaos that she's going to be like, and not like it. But I just absolutely adored this film because it's so much of my world and therapeutic view, like all wrapped up into one thing of like I almost like feel that like deal with your bullshit that just like ekes out of this of like stop being afraid of everything and thinking you can control everything and accept for fuck's sake that you are not an all-powerful being contending with some exact right path you have to find to beat the universe. It just doesn't exist. If you can filter out some of these things that make you feel not okay and realize I am enough. And that it's okay to choose something that makes you happy being the answer. It's okay to try to be pleasant, like without having to be false. Like if you're not okay, don't be okay. But like if you have an option, don't be a dick. I think it's so powerful looking at the way all these things intersect at once. Like we all have endless multiverses that we are constantly trying to explore, looking for some restorative experience in them that we will never get. And if you give yourself permission to let that go and live your life from this day forward, how freeing that gets to go, okay, I'm going to learn from the bad things that happened, but not fear them anymore as best I can, because it sounds so easy and it's not. It's not perfect. There's no perfect way to do it, but to be better more often and give yourself permission to recognize, I'm doing the thing again, which we see Evelyn do right at the second, where she pulls from all she's ever been and feels herself slipping into it and then snaps right back. And the way the movie just snuck these things in by, you know how people can change forms and pull from different parts of the realities? Well, they have to do a hardcore grounding exercise before they can change modes, don't they?
Yeah.
Just fucking golf clap.
So in your body.
So in your body. But in order to do that, in order to access this intergenerational stuff, you have to you have to stop everything and do something so fucking weird that it gets you back into your body right now, so that you realize, I need a different tool for this situation.
No, that's a good point. That is technically, I didn't even think about that. That is a grounding exercise, because that's what is grounding, is like trying to get yourself like back into your body by almost playing not a trick on your body, but like doing something. That's why people do things like dunk their head in ice, because you're trying to like shock your system.
Right. Into paying attention to what's in front of you right now.
Yeah.
And this movie did that to us by being so ridiculous that we paid attention. And I just love everything about it. The way they did it, the way they tricked you, the way they both threw it in your face and did it in metaphor and did it in a way you can't avoid, all at the same time. It's what all of the therapies that I've really come to love and like do, because they go like, and if that ain't your body regulating itself in the face of your worst moments and you starting to feel better, but the only time you actually got to feel that better again is when you stopped hiding from those worst moments. The therapies, the trauma work, that's what good trauma work is we got to teach you to stop running and realize that you're okay now, while also simultaneously acknowledging you were very much not okay then. And that's okay that you weren't okay and that hurt you. And let's give that air and let that breathe and let that hurt. But also at the same time realize that is a past edition of me. And I no longer have to wait in the mail for a new one to come, like AOL, before I can be a cool kid again. I can choose that right now and choose to have a different, better life right now by investing in not needing to run away from everything that makes me uncomfortable, but just go, okay, sometimes I don't have enough. But when I do, it's okay for me to be uncomfortable a little bit without feeling like I'm going to be wrecked again. It's just so much of everything everywhere all at once.
It is funny how much the title, you do want to say it as you're talking about it.
Yeah. I agree.
But I absolutely loved this. It instantly catapulted to among my favorite films of
great.
The movies like this one that like work in so many things to like break you.
It definitely is a movie I've been telling clients to watch or referencing with clients. You know,
Absolutely.
Like there are some clients where you just want them to watch this and go like, just absorb it. I don't even want to explain it to you. You'll feel it. It'll do it all by itself. And the brilliance of this movie of like changing your sensory experiences so much that you have to attend to it. God damn, brilliant. Just brilliant.
All right. Hannah?
So I think one of the things that has just been really nice is that we could talk about it on the podcast. It's been really fun just talking about it with the two of you, because I love this movie so much. Yeah, I love this film. I've probably watched it 20 times, if not more than that. I think that it really, as someone who has a lot of intergenerational trauma, as well as just regular old trauma, for lack of a better way to say it. Good old-fashioned trauma. I think that the way that they did this film made me learn something about myself that I didn't know yet.
Oh.
And I think that every time I watch it, it's almost like I get to relearn that, and that feels really nice. And so that's a part of why I've watched it so many times. I think that, and I love the final message, which to me is that kindness, being kind, is a good way to live. And has made me really think more about having more kindness towards myself, as well as other people. And so I love this movie. I love the music. I've listened to the soundtrack. I can tell where the music is in the film because I've watched it so many times. I really enjoy the way that they present all of this information to us, and I think it was done just absolutely beautifully. And I'll probably watch it a million more times. And they definitely deserve all the awards that they got. Mm-hmm. And I was so excited when this movie came out, and it came out in January of last year. And I remember thinking, I hope that people remember this film when it comes to the Oscars, because sometimes films that come out in January get pushed to the side if something really good comes out in December. There can be a lot less hype about things. It doesn't always happen, but in my experience of paying attention to the Oscars, which are, mostly white people doing stuff, is that movies get forgotten and get pushed to the side for whatever reason. And I was really glad that this movie did not get pushed to the side because of all the different parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And, there's one thing I want to tag on to what you said is that even with a person who has, by her own admission, had a bunch of shit that this movie covers, with the big old capital T word and the little T word. Mm-hmm. But even in the way that they covered such heavy material, in the way that they did it, they made it accessible and safe to experience in a way that feels like you're empowering yourself against it in the future. And if that's not therapy, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
And I will say too, and then we can be done, we can wrap up, is that I meant to bring this up earlier, is the director Daniel Kwan, when he won his Oscar, when they won the Oscar, he in his speech said, "Hey son, if you're watching, I don't expect you to win an Oscar. Don't worry about it. I just want you to have like a good time." So basically, he didn't quite say it like that.
Yeah.
But basically was trying to live the message of the movie, which is that your dad achieved something wild. Don't worry. This isn't supposed to be something. This is not normal. I think that's what he said. He goes, "This is not normal to win an Oscar."
Yeah.
So you don't have to live up to this standard. That's not an expectation in this family just because I did it, which I thought was sweet, and a way to he was living his values in that moment. All right. Well, let us know what you think about Everything Everywhere All at Once. As always, you can find us at Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Popcorn Psychology. You can find us on Twitter, still hanging on, at Twitter, that is, at popcorn_psych. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. If you can leave us a review wherever you listen, that's the best way for other people to find us, and we really appreciate it. And we read them if you write us one as well. And so that's that. Everything Everywhere All at Once, baby, season 6.